Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Welcome back, everyone. We are at the beginning of a brand new year, and many of us have a feeling of uncertainty. Some of us are looking at it as, wow, new opportunity, clean slate, got a lot that I can accomplish in this year. And then there are many of us just wondering what's coming next. It was an interesting year, had a lot going on. What is coming next? Let's look at that through the eyes of science. And this gentleman has done that kind of work and more throughout his career and continues to have his finger on the pulse of a lot of things going on in his past, many eureka moments. And he is also somebody that has done lectures, many publications, taught so much more, and he's still plugged into all of this. And he's also our professional of the year. Grant Venerable is with us. Hey, Grant, how you doing today?
I'm fine, Stephen.
Good having you back with us. And there's a lot of uncertainty. What do you think is going on? Why do you think we have that view of wondering what is coming next?
It's pushed me back to my foundations of my being, my origins. And my origins, I have to admit, are from the universe. And so that's where my thoughts have been going in the last week. And it reflects on the news that we're seeing on the cable channels, the internet feeds. But they all point to one thing, and that's the word you used, uncertainty. And there's another word, chaos. And my reflection is that I would be dishonest if I said I didn't know anything. I haven't thought about it. I have. And we're given an opportunity here. It's a privilege to be able to reflect on uncertainty and chaos. Can you hear me well?
Yep, I hear you loud and clear.
Yeah. And do you have a picture?
Yeah, I see you too.
Get my picture back. So let me see if I can.
Well, there you go. Technology. There's lots of uncertainty with that too.
Technology. The word tech is art. It's skill at achieving something, and had many technological evolutions. Where we are now is not going back before technology to what is the essence of our beings. What makes humans? That's something I've reflected on a lot in levels of advancement. So at this point, I've had enough experience under my belt, or I begin to connect the dots. I first heard that terminology after 9/11 in September 2001, September 11. And finally, the more insightful news media people were coming up with, we were surprised. I would say the government, the society was surprised by those planes hitting the buildings. But as more and more information came about, it became clear that the powers that be, the people who are the managers of society, had a failure of connection of dots. And that means that it was a failure of dealing with the society as being a holistic, systemic organism, or it should be a systemic organism. I think there was an assumption that it was, but it wasn't. Because if you go back to Old and accounts religiously, the Apostle Paul wrote extensively about a system. What is a system? Well, the system he was referring to was ourselves, our bodies. We are composed of different elements that have different functions. And when those functions and elements do not hate one another, you have a very uncomfortable and threatening uncertainty. And when they cannot communicate, the organism cannot survive. So, as Paul said, the hand cannot say to the foot, I have no need of thee. Or the heart cannot say to the lungs, I have no need of thee. Because then you get just a big ash of stuff. We're not quite all the way there yet. We're on the way until we can wake up and recognize who we are as elements of a holistic system and organic system, certain rules, properties, and laws that govern it. When we understand those laws and properties, we're able to emulate the universe itself. We're able to emulate nature. Nature has safeguards built into it, if I could put it so crudely as that. But as a biologist would say, as nature evolved to be what it is. And I don't want to get into religious conversation there or have that conflict with science conversation, but that's a standard universal principle, is evolution, just like the universe is a universe. It means turn as one from the Latin.
So I've always wanted to ask this question because in my journey, I believe that the universe supports us. It wants the best for us. Some would say, well, that is a God. I have friends that, are somewhat religious, and I'm not trying to connect this to religion, but that's what they would say. Well, who do you think created the universe? How do you define this thing we call the universe?
The universe is that which holds us, embraces us, governs us all with its laws and principles. As far as we know, it's always been here, really. It may have had several starts because our language doesn't enable us to conceive anything else but something that starts and ends. I doubt it's that way at all. I think that there's cycles. That comes out more and more. We're just finishing a cycle. We're moving into another cycle.
So how do you define cycle?
Cycle is that which is a circular activity in which where you start, you could keep coming back to that same start, but it's on a whole new level, a whole new dimension that you don't imagine from the previous level that you were on. And you could look at that, just look at the 20th century. It had a start. My great uncle, who I saw quite a bit as a child, who lived from 1884 to 1969, when I finished graduate school in 1970, or even before I finished graduate school, I had watched the moon landing on television. That was a stretch for my uncle, Uncle Blaine Venerable. And he says, brother, do you really think men were up there walking on the moon? And I said, yes, Uncle Blaine. I have data and information that backs that up. In fact, one of my professors at the University of Chicago chemistry department, a nuclear chemist, was verifying that he received rocks that Neil Armstrong brought back from the moon and then later moon landings. And he analyzed those rocks for their content, their chemical content. So it was Uncle Blaine and I were from two different universes, from two different time zones, very, very different. So we're in a time zone now where it's difficult to imagine what's even 10 years into the future. And so many things seem very strange.
Interesting that you're bringing that up with the moon landing in 1969. I remember too as a kid black and white TV, by the way. Um, Now you have the two astronauts on the International Space Station, who are been stuck there. They're supposed to be 8 days, and now it's been months. Um, and they might not be back until at least April, so even more months. But there was a picture that surfaced with them wearing Santa hats. And then many were just what we're talking about here, questioning, well, wait a minute. Wait, they only prepared for 8 days. How do they have Santa hats now, months later? So there's that uncertainty for a lot of people in the general public, wondering what's happening, what's going on there. I don't know the answer that came from techs and officials and things like that. I believe that a lot of the supplies were left on there from previous missions, and they just reached into, storage cargo hold and found those hats. But it's the same exact thing that you were talking about from the landing on the moon, uncertainty.
It's causing us to learn new ways that are really old ways being. And the word surrender comes to mind, that we learn to surrender to a greater narrative about the universe, about ourselves. In fact, you had invoked the word God. And where I am right now is I view God as whatever is our narrative in our core belief system. What is the narrative that we've put together? Or have we even put a narrative together? Well, that's discussed in the New Testament about in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was indeed God. But what is the Word? From the Greek, the logos. The Word is the narrative. That need not be a deity. It need not be something invisible and a deity, not whatever. It need not be a spooky thing, but people have made it that because it's part of their narrative. I'm learning more how to surrender, really surrender to the narrative that came to me. And that means relaxing into it and knowing that when I let go to whatever this universe is about, it directs me in the way that I need to go in order to live in accordance with my core beliefs, my narrative, which is a core of beliefs that says there is a dynamic in this universal system that maintains its stability even as it endures. Those two things are sometimes at loggerheads with each other. If it's stable, do we want it to endure or will it endure? But stability and endurance really go together in the universal laws and principles. Everything I've studied in chemistry indicates that. I really understood chemistry in the middle of my graduate schooling when in Wisconsin, Thanksgiving Day, I was driving from Chicago to Madison, Wisconsin, to have dinner with friends, one of whom I studied with at the University of Chicago, who had later moved on back to Madison, where she did her undergraduate work. And she was with her husband and friends, and they had invited me to dinner. Well, on the way up to that dinner, there was a light snow on Interstate 90. I'm a Californian, but I'd been in Illinois for 3 years already. But I didn't pay attention to what snow people do. And I dropped my speed to 55 miles an hour, yet and still. I discovered all at once I went into a tailspin. I felt the tires lose traction with the highway. And there I was in a spin. And I was looking and trying to regain control by steering in the direction of the spin out and saw the cars behind me were ahead of me. And then I was in another direction. What do? I surrender to the moment, not knowing what else to do, but intuitively steer in the direction of the spin out. And lo and behold, I wound up on the side of the interstate, keeping going, but something, the momentum of the vehicle uh, allowed the vehicle to come up out of the trench to the right side of the road and back up on the parking of the highway. And I came to a stop with my heart in my mouth, beating, wondering what happened. Car behind me stopped. Says, that was quite a display. My goodness, are you hurt? Do you need help? I said, no, I'm all right. I'm all right. But I was asking, why am I all right? I was headed right for a concrete embankment, but went under the overpass instead of hitting the concrete embankment. That event had more significance to me in later years than it did at that time, until I realized it was the very subject of my doctoral dissertation at the University of Chicago, in which I was studying radiation chemistry, in which there were unstable radicals being generated in my reaction mixture that only lasted a few millionths of a second, called microseconds, and then they were gone. And I realized this whole event was about radiation protection. I was in a field that was studying, what do you use? What other chemicals can you put in? What can a human being take into their bodies to protect themselves from high energy radiation, whether it's from cosmic rays or a nuclear reactor that broke down? Well, it was really more than that. It was what directs us in life that we cannot see. We cannot put our physical fingers on. That's what I carried with me from then on.
How did you
But
connect that situation in the snow to that article that you wrote, that piece that you wrote?
how did I connect it?
Yeah.
Oh, I connected it. It's in my memoir. It's in volume 2. I think it's around chapter 16, in which I don't know how I connected it. It was instinctual, it was intuitive. And as I've learned to stop trying to run my brain to death, figuring out things, if I relax and let intuition take over, I
Mm.
don't know what that is, but it is this something. Once I relax and know that there's something greater on the job, that will let me know. Yes,
Or how does someone get to that point, Grant, where they can relax and trust their
people do
intuition?
it in different ways. Some people, as they did on Christmas Eve last week when I went to the Episcopal Cathedral here in Atlanta, uh, sometimes they do it by going to church. They go to the synagogue, they go to the ashram, they go to the mosque, they go to religion, hoping that that God thing is there that will guide them.
Mm.
And many people find that. They can't explain it scientifically. They may be able to make some intellectual explanation, but it need not be true. All it need be is accepted for what it is. And those that learn how to surf, it's really a process of surfing, like those big waves coming in to the California coast this week. And surfers have learned how to surf and follow currents that nobody else can see or feel.
Mm.
It's one of those great unknowables about life. But it came up yesterday in the conversation I had in this discussion group. And that's what I was dealing with my dissertation that has really mapped out, it's charted the course of my life, in that I was studying molecules made up of transition metals and cyanide groups. And in this radiation environment, they would break down and become intermediates that were something else. And then those intermediates would react, and more intermediates, and then materials already in there before the intermediates, and they produce the final product. That's what happens in our everyday lives. We're constantly engaging in processes that take you from point A, situation A, to situation B, not even realizing that there could be dozens of situations in between A and B, or thousands of things. And those things are unstable, so they don't stick around. And we're in a situation like that. We're now between the great election of 2024 and the great election of 2022. And what has come already between November 5th and today is unstable situations we don't even know how to talk about or deal with. And I realized I'm in perfect parallel with what my doctoral research was about, that I've applied to the rest of my life. And you asked how. The how is talk about it with others. Don't fear to talk about your fears or your uncertainties. That's one of the problems. There's a situation between males and females. Females are not ashamed of talking about it with their female comrades, their sisters. Now, this is kind of a little change in direction, but it's exactly what's going on today. Males have greater fear. They have great fear. They won't talk about the most vulnerable things in their lives with their male comrades because they get ashamed. What will their comrades think if they talked about things? But some males are finding that out. They're in brotherhood groups, and they're getting to what sisters discovered hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years ago. And we have a term for it in New Orleans. It's called gumbo yaya. When women go through anxieties, they don't go into fight or flight. And the medical field didn't figure that out until 20 years ago. Men are the only ones that go into fight or flight to
Wow.
try to get through the anxieties. Females get together, they run to each other's homes. And if there are any men there, they'd say, what's going on? How can these women understand themselves? They're all talking at the same time.
Why, Grant, do you think that men, for lack of a better description, shut down on this, whatever it might be, and women get together and discuss it?
Chromosomes, it's chemistry. And it's all part of the unity of the universe. That's supposed to be the way it is all I can figure it out. Those two sexual entities are ultimately supposed to talk to each other. Some do, most do not, but the women do. It's chemical.
Wow. Do you think it goes back to, what's always been, placed upon males, don't show emotion, be a man, man up. So it's internalized where women are okay expressing?
That's it.
Mm.
That's it. It took me a while to get there, but I had to get through graduate school and I had to go through a very painful event in my life. It was my second job as a professor in a very wonderful university. And I got fired from that job after having taught for about 10 years. That wasn't supposed to happen. Life is full of things that aren't supposed to happen.
Mm.
But I learned to start to talk about it. I even went into some group process experiences where we were invited to talk to the partner. We were sitting opposite on the floor of this big ballroom in a hotel and share, what's the most traumatic episode you've experienced in the last 6 months? And for me, it was getting terminated without warning.
Wow. And when you say speak to a partner, was that a stranger that you were paired with?
A stranger, yes.
Yeah.
It
Interesting.
would have been hard to talk to a friend without being embarrassed.
I did a retreat, somewhat what you're describing. It was in a hotel ballroom kind of situation back in late February of this year. And it was a lot of it was that, you were paired off with strangers could be from another country that spoke the same language, but very impactful to see, their view of things, and also look in, these were all men, another man's eye, and see the anguish and that they're going through something. We are out of time for today. Interesting talk. Every time we get together, Grant, it's always fascinating looking at things through your eyes and from a scientific angle.
That's what we call chemistry. Human chemistry.
Love it.
Social chemistry.
What's the best way for somebody to find out about your memoirs? Is it just go to Amazon?
Google it or use a search engine. And it's on Amazon, it's on Apple, it's on Barnes and Nobles. It's called Footprints in the Chaotic Unknown.
Interesting. We're there now. We're there now, aren't we? The chaotic unknown.
We're there now. We're there.
Yeah. Wow. Grant, thank you so much for being here. Love your insight as always. And here's to a fantastic, despite the unknown and the chaos, here's to a great 2025.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. And to you also and all of our listeners.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house.
And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.